Uh, Very, very warm welcome to Groundswell 2024. If this is your first session of this festival, it's great to see so many of you here in what I hope will be a really interesting chat and discussion. And we're going to have a few presentations, and then we're going to open the floor to some Q&A a little bit later. So, yeah, really great to have you all here. I'm joined on the stage by Dr. David Unwin and Dr. Jenny Goodman, and they'll be talking a little bit later. And I'm going to leave them to introduce themselves far better than I can do. But I want to set the scene for this talk. And as many of you know, I've been involved in farming, regenerative farming, for quite some years now, and in particular, developing pasture-fed livestock systems and really being an advocate for healthy meat and milk and animal products that are good for human health. And it's really taken me on a very interesting journey where I've changed a lot of the meat that I eat to pasture-fed and really celebrating that and advocating it to other people. But something else in my diet wasn't quite right. And it wasn't until I met these two doctors the day after Groundswell last year at a little festival called Pearfest, which is attempting to bring together medicine, food and farming to talk about the important links that exist between those, that it really got me thinking about my own health and my own diet. So as a bit of context and introduction to what our doctors are going to talk to us about today, I'm going to tell you my 12-month of preparation for this talk today. And just over 12 months ago, this was me, bursting literally out of my, my jacket, carrying quite a bit of central obesity. And this had crept up on me somewhat, and as I was saying, eating all the right meat, but I wasn't losing any weight, and I became concerned about this, particularly when David spoke and talked about some of the things that might happen to me later in life, and which he's going to touch on in his presentation. So it really got me thinking about where I was going wrong and what I needed to do to change things. And I had tried dieting before by trying to reduce the amount of sugar that I intake, and I have a hugely sweet tooth. But it was just miserable attempting to do that. So I set about a new regime, and I'm going to share that with you today. And you're going to see some before and after photos of some of David's other patients. And I haven't got an after photo yet, but I'm here in the flesh, hopefully looking a little bit slimmer. And in fact, I am, and I'll show you some data on that. And I just want to talk briefly about what I've done in connection from what I've learnt from these doctors. The first thing is I massively reduced the amount of processed carbohydrates that I've been eating, predominantly flour and bread and cereals, replacing those with proteins and more vegetables and so forth. So for example, for breakfast, I used to have a bowl of cereal and I've replaced that with 2 eggs just on their own fried in butter. I've also somewhat reduced the other carbohydrates that I've been eating, the unprocessed things like potatoes, to try and reduce carbohydrates. And the really interesting thing, the result of these 2 actions is that my sweet tooth has disappeared because I'm no longer getting a drop in my blood sugars shortly after a meal when the carbohydrates wear off and I'm then reaching out for something sweet. So that's immediately made that challenge I had previously much easier. I have reduced the amount of alcohol I've been consuming, which wasn't massive before, but events like Groundswell would always like to have a few beers. It's got to be done, but I have really realised the effect that alcohol can have. I've also aimed to eat at least 30 different plants a week, and this is coming from some of the work of Professor Tim Spector that's been advocating that a diverse diet of lots of plants is really important. I'm now getting up to some 40 plants a week. It can be difficult to achieve that. Many people in the UK are perhaps on 10 to 15 different plants a week, so the research says. And it takes a bit more effort to ensure that diversity during the week. But to also, I must say I've had to forego some of my ethical buying habits on buying in season and buying local. It's been a little bit more challenging, especially during the Hungry Gap in the spring, to make that happen. But I've made an exception to see what would happen. And I've pretty much had a normal amount of exercise that I would have been doing before. So I've not changed in any great form the amount of exercise I've been getting. So the results have been essentially losing 10 kilos in the last 12 months, but it's not been entirely straightforward. And I've kept weekly records of my weight. And here you can see a graph of my weight starting 12 months ago. And after seeing these doctors, you could see this sudden drop where I was like shocked into action and lost quite a bit. But then you can see that it started creeping back up. And this was because I spent 2 months in Italy and I found it extremely hard to avoid pasta. And I spoke to Dave and he said, this is what's called carb creep, and it can slowly creep back into your diet without you realizing. I then get home, Christmas, that's that first spike. Then after Christmas, I think, God, I got back on top of this, groundswell's coming up. And so back on the same diet and lose quickly again. Then I go skiing, lots of exercise skiing, but also lots of carbs and alcohol, all the things that I shouldn't have been doing, but again saw the results of quickly changing that back soon after. So it showed me how quickly changing that diet can affect my weight. And so there I am today, but still with some way to go. I've also, alongside measuring my weight, been monitoring my blood pressure, and I'm going to let David explain a little bit more about blood pressure in due course. But what was really interesting to see is how my blood pressure was related to my weight, and the worse my weight was, the worse the blood pressure was. But David will tell us more about why that is. This actually, and you'll think I'm a complete nerd, I have actually been weighing myself regularly for the last 5 years. And so this is a graph of my weight for 5 years, which shows that I'm lighter now than I've been for 5 years. But there's an interesting kind of plateau in the middle. And I want to just point out that this was a period of stress in my life. And I think it's really interesting to see the result that stress has on the weight, and perhaps how much control we have on our diets. And during COVID, the sort of previous low points was perhaps a different time where weight behaved differently. So I'm on the right track, but by no means there yet, because in fact, when we look at the body mass index, I'm still in the overweight category. And in fact, I was in the obese category a couple of years ago, and that's quite frightening. And I've said that to people, and they're like, no, that's not true. Surely you were not obese. But I genuinely was, and I think that's very interesting how our perception of what obese and overweight is has definitely shifted over time, and I'm sure our doctors will touch on that. So I'm kind of halfway down the overweight category, and about another 10 kilos to go, and I'll be safely in the healthy weight range. And I'm told that a slow, gradual diet is far more effective than a sudden one that you're tempted then to put weight back on. But there are other things to mention that, I feel healthier, gut health has definitely improved, and so there are other benefits to be seen here. And I thought it would be an interesting experiment and context for what we're about to hear today from our doctors. So with that, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David to give us a bit more intel. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm super excited to be here today, really let's mingle the two worlds, the world of medicine, my world of medicine and your world of farming, because we all want a better world, and we care, and we have a lot of similarities. And I'm hoping by the time I've finished, you can see some amazing opportunities for all of us to find a better world. My passion, my absolute passion, is human health without using drugs. So I'm so interested in achieving true health for my patients. I've realized that for the first 25 years of my life as a doctor, all I did was give drugs to my patients. They'd start off with one, and then another, and another one, then tablets for the side effects of the drugs. And it went on ridiculously. And it was very depressing, very, very depressing. And I think in some ways, these chemical inputs are similar to what's happening in farming, where you're using sticking plasters instead of looking for the real cause of our problems. And that's what I'm now doing in the world of medicine. I have two hats, though. I also since the age of 13, have been working in bird reserves. So I've managed land since I was 13 years old with a view to biodiversity. On top of that, Jen and I produce most of our own meat on a small holding. So that's me at the bird sanctuary, the Three Owls Bird Sanctuary. People leave us money and I spend it on land. And then I'm really interested in what can I achieve in terms of biodiversity with the land. Recently, I've discovered that ruminants help improve my land. Particularly, I've been cropping in the winter, and one of my favorites are marsh orchids, and there are now so many of them since I started winter cropping that you can't count them, and that wasn't achievable before. So that got me into looking at soil, thinking about biodiversity. But what about the practice? So I've looked after the same population since 1986. So we have about 10,000 patients north of Liverpool. It's not a privileged area. During that time, this is Dan, and Dan has various problems. So you can see he's overweight. He's got a big tummy. He also has blood pressure. He's only 39, but his blood pressure is requiring the maximum dose of an ACE inhibitor called perindopril. On top of that, he has very poorly controlled diabetes. So this guy is 39. What is his future? Well, his future is if you have poorly controlled diabetes and high blood pressure, he's losing 1/3 of his life expectancy. He's young. This really, really matters. It isn't okay just to give him one drug and another, which is what he was on. And what worries me is in my practice, we've had a 10-fold increase in people like Dan since I started in 1986. 10-fold. So during your lifetime, there has been an epidemic of obesity, of diabetes, and high blood pressure. And nobody's asking why. We're just giving them drugs. Nobody is questioning all the deaths that are going on, all the death certificates I'm signing. We just think, the answer is more inputs. So I'm thinking really carefully about why is Dan in the pickle that he's in. Look at him now. Okay, so Dan now is not on any medications at all. His blood pressure is better than it's been for 20 years. His diabetes has vanished. He's in drug-free diabetes remission. He's not a patient. He's a human being that doesn't need a doctor. He's alive and awake and taking responsibility for his own health, which is what we should all do. Before, he was just a passive recipient of what I did. I treated him and neglected him while he got fatter. And what did I do? I gave him inputs. Inputs. And we've now got in the practice, I've done that for 142 people. So in every clinic I do, I'm seeing people like Dan taking them off drugs. Every single clinic. This Monday, I saw a guy, he's lost 11 stone. And he's only just over 30. What was his life like before? He came to me for bariatric surgery, but he never needed it. It was what he was eating. So my point is this idea, we keep using chemicals to solve what are actually biological problems. And if we haven't thinking about why, what's going on your farms, you've started that. The answer isn't always chemicals, and I'm as guilty as anybody. For 25 years, all I did was drug my patients. And you know what? I didn't see very many healthy patients. Because of my link to wildlife, I'm very observant of human beings. The farmers in this room are very observant of your stock. You can look at stock and you know that's healthy, that isn't. I can do the same for human beings. It's a lifelong passion to look at people. I didn't see healthy stock in my practice. And now you find skin improves, blood pressure, so many things, as I'm going to show you. If you get the diet right, there are fewer problems. And that's what you know that on your farms. But what is so tragic is I see that very many farmers are not extending that to their own lives. They're ashamed to eat their own products because they're told it's unhealthy and will cause cardiovascular disease. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case and show you some evidence. A bit of context, there are 2 million people in the UK that are taking more than 7 medications every day. How have we got there? How's that happened? Well, let's see how this could happen to our friend Russ. Here he is, when I met him last year. So really for his blood pressure, we could have given him indapamide. That's the latest, the modern thing. Unfortunately, it may have side effects, Russ. So you might get type 2 diabetes because of the indapamide, and you might get gout. But don't worry, because I can give you metformin for the diabetes and allopurinol for the gout, so you don't have any problems. I'll just treat those. What if your blood pressure still isn't well controlled? Well, Russ will give you amlodipine. The trouble with amlodipine is your ankles may swell and you might get headaches. But don't worry about that either, because I've got tablets for those. So you could have some furosemide for your ankle swelling, and I could give you cocodamol for your headaches. Maybe your blood pressure still isn't well controlled, because we haven't actually done anything about the cause, have we? All I've done is try and control it. There's your list of side effects on the perindopril. Perindopril was the drug that Dan was taking. And you can see that for Dan and also Russ, it is so easy that it starts with one and then another, but you never question what's going on, and you never think, why have I got high blood pressure? Why? Because if you knew, then maybe you could do something about it. Some physiology now, because I like my patients to understand. I don't want them to just take a diet sheet. I want them to understand the appropriate action for their health. I want to talk to you about insulin. So high blood sugar is dangerous within 7 hours. It starts damaging the lining of your arteries. So nature controls blood sugar very, very closely using insulin. But what does insulin do with that sugar? Insulin pushes sugar out of your bloodstream and inside cells where it can't do any damage. Next question, what happens to that sugar? Well, depends really. It may be that I can run around a lot and use up all that sugar in my muscles. But what if I eat more breakfast cereals, more Mars bars, more pizza and more bread than I need to run around? The extra sugar becomes fat. The cells turn it into fat. And that fat is in your belly. That's central obesity. Central obesity is linked to 7 forms of cancer as well as diabetes. It really matters. So this is Russ. And he's having pizza and he's having chips. There we are. He's had some jammy Dodgers. And gradually, his liver is filling with fat. This is fatty liver. And fatty liver interferes with the good work of insulin. So his insulin isn't working as well, and he's struggling to control his blood sugar. But the fat is also building up in his pancreas gland. And these two things start off by causing high blood pressure, but eventually it becomes, about 10 years later, this is how we become type 2 diabetic. And those of you who know about farming, which is everybody in this room, know that if you want to produce foie gras, fatty liver, you just give geese loads of carbohydrate. You force them to eat more carbohydrate than they want. And the result is fatty liver. Now, we have a situation now where 38% of everybody you know has fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver. 38% of all your friends, all your relatives have fatty liver. Only doctors are not talking about it because we don't know what to do about it. It's an international scandal. And there's the data for that. It's now 38%. It's going up and up and up, fatty liver. So are we eating sugar with your sugar with your sugar? Yes. Breakfast cereals, snacks, bars, biscuits. It goes on all day long. What I missed myself until 2012 was the idea that starch, bread, rice, potatoes are concentrated sugar. Starch molecule is glucose molecules holding hands. It's loads of sugar. Some of you have got my teaspoon of sugar infographics. This was a way of helping my patients understand how much sugar was in what they were eating. So a small bowl of rice is equivalent to 10 teaspoons of sugar. 10. So if you have a curry, you're having a pile of sugar right there, but maybe you could have the curry on loads of green veg. The same with chips, even a ripe banana. So based on this, I've got the data on 800 foods. We started the low carbohydrate diet to help my patients eat nutrient-dense food that doesn't put up their blood sugar. These infographics, there are 7 of them, and they've been translated into 35 languages. If you want any of the others or in different languages, just Google PHC, which is a charity I helped set up, Sugar and Unwin, and you'll have all of them. Steal them, please. They're not copyrighted. Low carb diet. Now this is the money shot, When I started this, I was ridiculed and criticized. I was shouted at in public meetings that my patients would all die of cardiovascular disease. Because obviously they're having full fat milk, they're having cheese, they're having double cream and loads of meat and green veg. And here's the surprise. Every single marker of cardiovascular risk improved significantly. So each one of those graphs, weight, hemoglobin A1C, which is sugariness, the triglyceride, a cholesterol-like fat, the blood pressure, cholesterol, and cholesterol ratio, every single marker of cardiovascular risk in my patients over 3 years improved. I was told they'd die. Well, they haven't. I've done it for 12 years, and this work is all published. It's so important. We can eat food that you produce and be proud. And cardiovascular risk can go down. And I save money. So there's national data kept on the drugs that every GP prescribes. And you can see the red practice. We're the cheapest of every NHS practice in the area. I'm not using inputs. I don't need them. Quickly to Russ. Insulin has some tricks up its sleeve. Insulin causes Russ's kidneys to hoard salt. So the more carbohydrate he has, the more he can't clear salt, sodium. And when you go low carb, you wee out the salt, and that's how it helps improve blood pressure. And that's been known since 1933. It's not a secret, but it's hidden. So as a nation, I worry that we are overfed. Obesity is an international problem, but we're undernourished. I can't tell you the vitamin deficiencies, iron deficiency, vitamin D, so many things that Jenny will be talking about. We are undernourished. We need to be thinking about how to produce nutrient-dense food sustainably, which is what this is all about. And we could help the soil, we could help our stock, we could help biodiversity. And from my point of view, we could really help human health. We waste so much food. So much food. Again, let's produce nutrient-dense and let's produce it locally. This is the final slide. So I'm talking about regenerative agriculture and regenerative medicine, and what have they got in common? Are we interested in sustainability? I am. Are we interested in resilience of systems, but also human beings? an interest in true causes, avoiding chemical sticking plasters. You've got your farming chemical sticking plasters, and I've got my medical ones. They nearly always begin with antibiotics, antihypertensives, antihistamines, anti-inflammatories. Aim for healthy food with maximal nutritional density. A belief in quality of life, in my quality of life as a doctor. I want to enjoy being a doctor. I want to be proud of what I do. Farmers, it's exactly the same. You want to produce a product you are proud of and enjoy doing it. So important for young people. And finally, a hope for a better world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. A final point, if any of you want diet sheets, I've brought about 100 if anybody wants one.
Thank you very much, David. And we could have listened to you for much longer. I'm sorry to be cutting you short, but David is here for the 2 days. I persuaded him to come with his camper van and his wife, who's here. So he'll be around for 2 days to quiz and speak to. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jenny Goodman, who's now written 2 books. And I've had a look at her first book, which is Staying Alive and Healthy in Toxic Times. And then the second book is Staying Healthy, Getting Healthy in Toxic Times. So looking forward to hearing about that. Over to you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll very briefly introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I practice ecological medicine, and I discovered this in the 1990s through the British Society for Ecological Medicine, which is a wonderful bunch of disillusioned GPs who got fed up with, as I had done, with doling out the anti-drugs, the antihypertensives, the anti-diabetics, anti-epileptics, antidepressants, anti-inflammatories, anti-everything, rather than getting alongside the body and supporting it and supporting the immune system to heal naturally. I'm very lucky I found them, because one of the many things they taught me, as well as how to make people better, was about looking at causes and why so many of us are sick. And David gave the example of the huge epidemic levels of diabetes, obesity, and high blood pressure. But the same is actually the case with many, many chronic diseases, from neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, Parkinson's disease, to cancer, to heart disease, to just about everything else you can think of, including all the autoimmune ones like rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune thyroiditis, and so on. Now, just a quick aside, the story we're told is all this is due to an aging population. That's not true, for reasons I don't have time to go into now, but in both my books, I do have a rant about the fact that it's nothing to do with age. It's to do with what we're doing to our planet and therefore ourselves. So because of the British Society for Ecological Medicine having taught me how to look at the causes and treat the causes in terms of people's nutrition and in terms of what they're encountering in their environment, and by the way, environment is a kind of dead word. I prefer Colin Tudge's term, the biosphere, because it reminds us the environment is not an it out there, it's not inanimate. It's the living web of plants, animals, bacteria that we're all part of. So because of that, I've always had a very long-term interest in the connection between farming and food and health. So I spent 20 years seeing adults and children who are really sick, and it's to do with their diet and what they're eating or what they're not eating. But even when they're eating all the right things, I find they haven't got the right nutrients on board. And that's where you guys come in. And the new book was meant to be about the effects of pollution on health in general, and it's ended up the whole of the first third is about farming. Because I really have come to the conclusion that what farmers do is going to affect our health in the future far more profoundly than any twiddling around the edges that doctors are doing. So, what is nutritional medicine about? Putting the good stuff in and figuring out why it isn't already in there. And environmental medicine, taking the bad stuff out. So let's talk about nutrients. As you know, if they're missing from the soil, they're missing from your plate and from your body. And yes, people have got gut dysbiosis, so they're not absorbing all their nutrients. But often I'm seeing people who are eating all the right stuff. I mean, they're eating broccoli, and that should contain the day's amount of magnesium that you need, but it doesn't if the soil's been depleted by decades of intensive farming using synthetic fertilizers, which, as Graham Harvey and Colin Tudge both describe, makes the plants grow quick and tall, but thin and weedy with weak cell walls, and all that the synthetic fertilizers give them is phosphate, nitrogen, and a bit of potassium. Now, I have never found a patient deficient in any of those. What I find is patients deficient in magnesium. Okay, so cows get the staggers when there's not enough magnesium in the soil, and people get tense muscles and malfunctioning brains and blood sugar problems, because low magnesium messes with the blood sugar, as does the toxic metal nickel. So if you haven't got enough magnesium, you're going to have the human equivalent of the staggers. Restless legs is a version of it. So I see that, and I see low zinc and magnesium in all the kids with ADHD and autism, without fail. And I also see that they haven't got enough essential fatty acids. Now, they might be eating beef, but if they're eating beef that's been fed on grain or soya, then that cow will not be making the nice omega-3s for them. And it also won't be making vitamins A, B, and E. And if it's been fed on grain, also it'll be a bit pre-diabetic, like David's patients, and more likely to be infected with bacteria because they love sugar. Right, so grass-fed, actually pasture-fed, not fed on pure grass, which it turns out is another monocrop. I discovered this writing the book, but herbal lays, which have got all the herbs in the field that are directly good for us, and they are directly good for the cows, and therefore good for us when we eat the cows. So if we're eating naturally produced food, we're getting all the nutrients. I see magnesium low, zinc, iodine, selenium. Now, the plants can manage without selenium, but we can't. So when we eat the selenium-deficient plants, what happens? Well, selenium is crucial for the immune system to fight both cancer cells and bacteria. Okay, zinc is necessary for growth, for the healing up of cuts and scratches, for the sense of taste and smell, and so on. So if the soil has been overfarmed and synthetic fertilizers have been used, you won't have those good nutrients. Now, this is where it gets very difficult, right? Let me preface what I'm going to say by saying, I know it's tough to be a farmer, and I know it's even tougher to transition not just to regenerative, but to fully organic. But I'm here to plead with you to do that because you will be saving lives. So there are thousands of published academic papers showing that Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis and motor neuron disease and every form of cancer and dementia are all linked with us taking in pesticides. If it's in the soil, it's on the plate, it's in our bodies. I say again, I know the government is not making it easy for you to transition to fully organic, but refraining from tilling the soil, planting your seeds with a seed drill, and still spraying glyphosate. I'm probably going to be shot for saying this, but I have to say it because I've seen in clinic again and again glyphosate poisoning. There's a whole book about it by Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and there's quite a long rant about it in the first chapter of my book. And there are many court cases where the manufacturers have been successfully sued by people who've died of lymphoma or leukemia from contact with glyphosate. We have to manage without it, as farmers have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And it's perfectly possible. I mean, organic farms are successful, and actually the yield is better, not lower. There we are, I've said it. Okay. So, a couple of quick vignettes, case histories from my practice. Any kind of toxin, any kind of poisoning can be either acute or chronic. Acute is a whole dose all at once, and this is happening to people all over India and China and Africa, where they're using pesticide containers to carry water, and people are dying from it. In this country, it's much more likely to be chronic. But I have seen cases of acute poisoning, and they're both in the new book, the ones I'm going to tell you about. One is a young lady who was fit and healthy, working as a legal secretary, went on holiday to the French-Spanish border to see the cherry trees in blossom, which he did, walked through a field of, an orchard of peach trees on the way to their walked through it again on the way back and realized there were guys wearing funny costumes and protective gear and spraying. And long story short, 13 months after this incident, she came to me having been bedbound for 13 months with severe, what they called atypical chronic fatigue, cognitive impairment, couldn't think straight, couldn't even sit in the chair at the consultation, had to lie down, let her husband tell the story, had to turn the lights off. They weren't fluorescent. So she was photophobic, she was desperately ill. Oh, and she'd seen the neurologist and the rheumatologist and the thisologist and the thatologist, finishing up, of course, with a psychiatrist who wanted to give her antidepressants. But cognitively impaired as she was, she knew that was just one more chemical. None of these doctors had been interested when they were told that it began after this episode of being exposed to the insecticides. Very important point. Her husband wasn't ill. He'd walked through the same orchard as it was being sprayed. Genetic difference. If you want the specifics, it's an enzyme called paraoxonase 1, PON1. People who make it well can detox organophosphates and other pesticides moderately up to a point. People who don't make it well can't. Now, that genetic difference is not what's making them ill. It's the poison that's making them ill. And people with that genetic glitch and many other similar ones would have been just as healthy as the next person before the Industrial Revolution, before we started making 80 to 100,000 synthetic chemicals. She is better, this lady. I would say she's 80 to 90% better. She's working. She's functioning, she's thinking straight, and it was very, very difficult. You can read how I did it in chapter 1 of the new book. I've been instructed to give a plug for it. My publishers are here. The publishers are Chelsea Green. Hooray for Chelsea Green. It's called, because I have to tell you, the publishers of my first book, lovely as they are, wouldn't publish the second book because they said it was too political to be calling out the petrochemical industry in this fashion. So Chelsea Green have not censored me. Here is the book. Now, this lady needed organic vegetable juicing every day. She couldn't do it. Her husband did it for her. When she was then better enough, she needed saunas. She needed Epsom salts baths. She needed colonic hydrotherapy. She needed obscure supplements like phosphatidylcholine, like glutathione, and non-obscure ones like vitamin C, vitamin D, all the minerals, all the essential fatty acids, and a lot of rest, and a lot of fresh air and patience. She is 80% better. The only way she can be 100% better is if she lives at the top of a mountain or right by the sea, because she is left with a residue of chemical sensitivity. So the person next to her wearing perfume is going to make her feel violently sick. And that bit we couldn't get rid of. Chronic pesticide poisoning, far more common. I've only got time to tell you very briefly. But a lady came to see me, 47, breast cancer, was eating well, was living healthily, plenty of exercise, had grown up on a very non-organic arable farm in East Anglia, and her father had sprayed glyphosate everywhere. He'd also used parathion, and tetrachlorvin phos on the vegetable garden and the domestic pets. They didn't have any animals on the farm. Those two have been banned, by the way, but so is DDT. All these things periodically get banned, and the manufacturers say, oh, sorry, that was toxic. We've replaced it with something safer. No, look at the molecular structure. It's still poisonous. So this lady, when I tested her fat, not her blood, her fat, she had residues of the glyphosate and the tetrachlorvin phos and the parathion. 29 years since she had left home, left the farm, it was still in her system because she also had that genetic glitch which didn't enable her to detox. And by the way, that crucial detox enzyme, PON1, even if you've got it genetically, it's not made much in childhood. So all children, and especially babies and the fetus, are ultra vulnerable to these chemicals. And as I say, if you can wean yourselves off them in the way that I have to wean my patients off their steroids, their antidepressants, their metformin, and all the other drugs, you will be, simply put, saving lives. Okay, David made a lot of the parallels between what's happening with medicine and what's happening with agriculture. In both cases, there is a huge, powerful conglomerate of chemical corporations who want us to buy their stuff. They will only stop making it if we stop buying it. And if we learn in medicine to use herbal, natural, nutritional approaches, and in farming to use organic and truly regenerative methods. Biodiversity, okay? Biodiversity in the soil, which is killed off by all kinds of pesticides, leads directly to biodiversity in the human gut, a healthy microbiome. Don't forget, we don't just eat, we wear clothes. And if the clothes are organic cotton or hemp or linen or sheep wool that hasn't been dipped in any kind of insecticide, then we won't be absorbing the toxins through our skin. Skin's the largest organ of the body. Check out FiberShed, because they're here making safe, naturally produced clothes. Okay, so what we need to break is what I call the intervention cascade. That is what David described. It happens in obstetrics, it happens in pharmaceutical medicine, it happens in agriculture. You do one thing to solve a problem, you create another problem. Sometimes the pesticides even kill the predators that would have got rid of the pests for you if you had sufficient variety. And biodiversity is a bit of a technical word. I would prefer to call it abundant life, infinite variety. And if we have that in our fields, we'll have health in our bodies. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to say, 7 o'clock, I'm giving a little talk about the book and signing copies of it. I believe it's in the breakout tent, but check the timetable, 7 o'clock today.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That was great. Looking forward to delving into that book as well later. So we've just got 10 minutes or so to throw open to questions. We've got a couple of stewards with some mics, hopefully. Right, we've got some questions straight away. Why don't we go Anna, who I know has come all the way from Spain to be here.
Hello? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So interesting. Thank you so much for saying those things and those truths. A quick question. Would that kind of diet that you're proposing, Doctor, be the same for men and women? Or are there differences for female bodies and female hormones and all that kind of stuff?
That's a great question. I'd go beyond that and say each one of us has a different optimal diet. My wife and I don't have the same diet. And I see my life as a lifelong experiment to see, am I better or worse? That's what Russ is doing. I think each of us needs to measure stuff and, well, what do I weigh? How do I feel? How am I sleeping? Each one of my patients would have a slightly different diet based on the principles that I've said. And it will be different for men and women, but it also is different through life. When you get older, you don't absorb protein nearly so well. And one of the commonest things I find is older people are not having enough protein. Sarcopenia, where your legs aren't strong, that's why you fall over. So older people need more protein. Great question, thank you.
Great. Second question here.
Hi there. Yeah, it will be obvious to you, but I'll come and see you about a diet sheet later. This is probably a bit of a partial one because I'm not an organic farmer, but on the organic front for Jenny, one of the most harmful things we use in our mixed livestock, very, very small enterprise, is click, so far as I can gather. And we've spent years of time trying to test alternatives and natural oil-based remedies, all of that sort of stuff. So I approached the organic community as the first port of call. What does the organic community use on sheep? Because they clearly can't be using click, right? And they all do. And every single organic sheep farmer I've spoken to is using click. I don't know enough about the horticulture treatments, but I understand there's things like copper sulfate and those sort of things used in the organic sector as a whole. So yeah, I'd be interested to understand where you think that the trade-offs are between non-certified organic regen stuff like we might be doing versus certified organic.
I don't know the answer to that either, unfortunately, but somebody will. Possibly this lady in pink. So you can speak to each other after, that would be great. I'll just take, so we've got two more here, chap with the glasses. And
Yeah, thanks for pointing out the glasses. Very nice. Not all farmers here. I was a doctor for 40 odd years. Felt like about 400 years because I realised I was just an adjunct to the medical equipment company. And I'd like to just amplify something that David said, because I scanned thousands of livers in my time. When I started, there was almost no fat in livers. When I finished, it was not universal, but almost universal. It was so universal that nobody would believe it. The more obvious things are, the less people believe it. No, you can't possibly be telling me all these patients have fatty liver. I don't believe it. It was rather like Galileo's telescope and the Inquisition.
A quick point on that. One of the dangers is normalization. Things become so common, like obesity, fatty liver, that we just assume that's normal. And when my generation of older, let's say my generation of older doctors, when we die out, nobody will remember that type 2 diabetes is mainly unnecessary. And that's why this is urgent, because it's becoming normalized.
I'm looking ahead for questions and trying to organise the mic so we can be quick. Yes, we will. And I was going to suggest at the end, the lady in pink, if you come up here and you can give a small talk on the alternatives. Brilliant, thank you.
Hi.
I'm trying to make the most of the time we've got.
So,
over to you.
Well, I'll be quick. What are the top 3 things to make these healthy choices the affordable, easy choices?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So we've looked at this for my patients, my poorer patients. The choices for them are slightly different, but eggs. So I'm looking for nutrient-dense food that they can afford. Frozen fruit, frozen raspberries are cheaper. Full-fat dairy, calorie for calorie, butter isn't very expensive. Mince, and you can get mince maybe with more fat in it. Now, this isn't necessarily optimal, but we have to start somewhere for my poorer patients. I always start with eggs.
And if you want organic greens for free, sprout them on your window ledge. I mean,
Foraging, yeah. And keep hens instead of rabbits, or eat your rabbits.
I sort of had a bit of a mix of emotions. I felt a bit sick during that, and then I sort of felt better, and I don't really know what to do, and I'm thinking about what my kids are eating. But it was an amazing talk, so thank you very much. But a lot of this stems from how we educate people, and I had friends at university that were becoming doctors, and I don't remember them talking about this, and I know there's been some efforts to address the education around doctors. What have you seen in that field over the last few years?
yeah, so when I started medical school in 1976, I think I'm even older than you are, David, there was 1 hour on nutrition in 6 years, and that, I now know, was wrong as well. NutriTank, a great organisation started by Ali Jaffe, who was then a medical student, is now a junior doctor, has managed to get it up to 2 hours. There's a long way to go. And can I just also respond to Anna about women's diet being different? Young ladies, premenstrual tension, right? That's when the sugar cravings go completely mad. And I think the only way to prevent it is to eat protein and vegetable snacks every 2 hours for those last 2 or 3 days before the period comes. Otherwise, you will be on the sugar because nature thinks you're pregnant, you know?
The Royal College of General Practitioners has published an e-learning module which is free to all 52,000 GPs in the country, and it's the most successful module they've ever published. So there's despair and hope. Young doctors are interested, like young farmers, in becoming effective. There's the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine as well. So there is hope. There is hope.
Hi, my name's Holly. I run a company called Wild Work after coming out of health tech. I'm so interested to hear your talk, Jenny, about actually healthcare starts at farming, not at iPhone devices to make people feel better. So my question to you, Jenny, is about carrying on from Anna's point about premature menopause. And I wondered what data you had connecting glyphosate use with women's deteriorating age of onset menopause. Incidentally, I live in a high farming area, and all the women near me have gone through premature menopause without...
So premature menopause is an example of endocrine disruption. And pesticides are endocrine disruptors. Plasticizers are also endocrine disruptors. So are heavy metals. All these are carcinogens as well. Premature birth is also happening at epidemic levels, although that's partly magnesium deficiency. But yeah, it's about reducing our exposure to those toxic chemicals and maximising our nutrition and getting enough vitamin D, ideally through sunshine, to protect the bones. Vitamin D3 and vitamin K2, right? D3 from sunshine or supplements makes sure that any calcium and magnesium in your food is absorbed into the bloodstream. Vitamin K2 makes sure that it goes from the blood into the bones. And that's osteoporosis protection, but it's all tied up together, yeah.
I've got a supplementary on that that's really important. Polycystic ovarian disease is a symptom of high insulin levels, and it responds well to a low-carb diet. I've seen women who've not had a period for 13 years start menstruating again when you reduce the insulin levels, because if you're insulin resistant, your pancreas produces more insulin, you become hyperinsulinemic, and that stimulates the ovary to produce all these cysts. When you cut out the carbs, the insulin levels drop, and I've seen babies born with that.
Can you speak up? Yes. Yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah.
The question was whether there was any link there with glyphosate use.
Between glyphosate use and early menopause. Yes, it's not just what you're eating, it's what you're exposed to. The first court case against Monsanto was a school groundskeeper in California. Whatever he was eating, he was spraying the grass to keep the weeds down, as many local authorities are still doing, spraying the grass verges. Yeah. And by the way, Monsanto's defense is that it can't possibly do any harm because it disrupts a biochemical pathway not found in human cells. Well, that biochemical pathway isn't found in human cells, but it is found in every single bacterium that occupies our gut and is part of our microbiome, which is an essential organ like the liver or the pancreas. So it's damaging and destroying our microbiome, and from the gut, all the other diseases arise.
I just want to try and get the last 4 questions in. So, Rebecca, and then I've got some other hands clocked, and then we'll have to wrap up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Rebecca. I'm a farmer. I work for Pasture for Life, and I'm a mother. Wow, you brought me to tears, both of you. Both got young kids, and they both love carbs. No, in a good way. I'm also a cancer survivor. That I had when I was 32. But anyway, I just want to say thank you, firstly. Amazing session. If we can just book this tent the rest of the day, we've all got so many questions. How do we, as farmers, mothers, carers, patients, citizens, lobby doctors, other farmers, a government, who knows? At the Norfolk Farming Conference in February, I stood and at the beginning of the day, I asked the farming minister, well done, we recognise that the environment's important, now how the heck do we get nutrient density and healthy food to everyone, regardless of where they fit in our broken class system? How do we do it? And he said, we can't tell people what to eat. And the microphone was taken back from me because I had a rather rude reply. How do we march you up to number 10 on the 4th or the 5th of July? And how do we get this message out there? Because we've got to, because we have got so many lives to save.
I think thank you so much. Thank you. I think what we have here is a grassroots revolution. And the internet is making this possible, and social media makes this possible. And the more that we group with like-minded people, the more we find our tribe, the more powerful we become. So anybody that wants to help me can follow me on Twitter, @LowCarbGP, because the more followers I have, the more the politicians listen. I have already met with Wes Streeting at Parliament, and I'm trying to talk prevention. But yes, the grassroots revolution, become active on social media.
We are out of time, but I'm just going to push forward because this is so interesting and valuable, just for a few more minutes.
Hi, no, I'm Lily. I work in healthcare for the NHS, and I was just wondering, in regards to your discussion on diabetes and sort of, it can, very much can be diet controlled sort of thing, but alongside, the gentleman that was talking about, education and health, agriculture in education, the worrying thing is if people like us, we all understand, that diet can very much be, healthy. Regenerative farming is very, very good but if we were to bring it out more to the non-sort of farming communities, in order to sort of, help with the education side of it, the diabetes and the, the fantastic things we can do with, vitamins and all of that, how do we sort of, extend it forward so that people don't that don't understand can start to understand.
Yes,
because they
the cavalry are coming over the hill.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Freestyle Libre? They'll get cheap. These are continuous glucose monitors that you can wear on your arm that tell you the consequences of your dietary choices. And I've been prescribing these against the guidelines for my patients, and the results are astonishing because it tells you the effect of what you just ate. And I think that is going to change the world very rapidly. Insurance companies are really interested in this, and they're paying for all the drugs. So I have some hope there. Freestyle Libre are very good.
I mean, to address your broader question about education, we've got to have horticulture GCSE in schools. We've got to have GCSE cookery in schools. And also, this should be
even
government action from the top.
In agriculture,
Sorry?
a basics lesson in agriculture, because people, if they're not in this circle, they don't understand it and they don't get it.
But just in terms of the question of how we get the word out to the ordinary people who at the moment don't know and can't afford, there are hundreds and hundreds of charities all over this country dedicated to getting safe and organic food to the ordinary person. And I've listed them in the resources section in the back of my book. Now, it shouldn't just be down to charities. We need to campaign politically as well, absolutely. But there are many organisations taking on that very challenge.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, super inspiring. My hand's hurting from the amount of notes I've been scribbling down. If I left the festival now, it's been £280 well spent. I've just been struck by, poor incentives. Like what you're saying makes complete sense. Why the effing hell are we not doing this? Why are politicians not implementing
capitalism?
Yes. So it's our politicians are more interested in the interest of the multinationals. The multinationals want to make money. Yes. So money's more important than democracy and human health.
Yes.
How can we break this? I'm going to follow you on Twitter. We need to do a grassroots movement. But how do we break that?
You're right. There are perverse incentives. So I'm not, say, pre-diabetes, which is, I can solve in 93% of cases, I can solve pre-diabetes. The government are not interested. I'm not paid to reverse your pre-diabetes. I'm only paid when you actually have type 2 diabetes and I start giving you drugs. There's no incentive to prevention, and that's what I'm talking to the Labour Party about, prevention. The health service will never survive if we don't start preventing ill health.
Very good. Okay, very final question. We'll let you all go then.
Hi, Derek Taylor from the Open University. It's great to see the conversion between low-carb nutrition and regenerative farming. So great for that. Just to say that I've been following low-carb diet for 20 years, and it's not a problem. I'm probably healthier now in my mid-70s than I was in my mid-50s. It's a piece of cake. You just have to get over the first week or two. You have to have a low-carb cake. There are some good ones. But basically, how do you think we can actually break through the impasse? It was a lot more lonely when I started in 2003, but it's a lot more things are happening now. Do you think we'll actually break through, David?
We are breaking through. I was ridiculed. I was laughed at. I was shouted down in medical meetings. And now many, many doctors are interested. And the interest is great, and it's social media. Intelligent people are wanting health, and they're becoming suspicious of inputs. generally, I think.
What we have to get the word out about is that sugar, like all the other poisons we've discussed, it's particularly addictive. And the reason they're pushing it is because anything that's addictive is profitable. We're being poisoned for profit, and the way to fight back is to know it, talk about it, and boycott it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm so sorry to have to call it there. There's so many more questions, but David and Jenny will be hanging around. So thank you very much, David and Jenny, and thank you all for coming.